Brian London. You can follow me on X at Miami Radio Beast. He is Jonathan Ford. Follow him at Ford Jonathan 5 on X. Follow the show at Ford News Podcast. And Jonathan, we are going to play one note this week, and that one note is 34 charges and all guilty and all felonies for the former president, Donald Trump. He had his day in court, and he lost, Jonathan.
Developing now, former President Trump has been found guilty on all counts of falsifying business records in his criminal hush money trial, making him the first former U.S. president to be convicted of a felony. Jurors delivered their verdict this afternoon after 2 days of deliberations that spanned 9.5 hours. Trump will be sentenced July 11th, just a few days before Republicans could select him as the Republican nominee.
I was completely blown away, Brian, as you know, that I did not even make the prediction that he would be found guilty on all 34 charges. But a jury, after deliberating for roughly 9-10 hours, came back unanimously with the guilty on all 34 charges under New York Penal Code 170-15.
Yeah, you and I both discussed this last week, that we did not think it was going to be a unanimous decision on all 34 charges. But, you know, as we saw the jury get the case to deliberate, and we saw the notes they passed out to Judge Mershon and the questions they asked, it started to look like, one, there wasn't going to be a hung jury, right? We kind of got that feeling. And then it really started to look like, man, the way they're looking at the jury instructions, the way they're looking at some of the testimony they wanted to kind of go over again, it looked like this thing was heading in the prosecution's direction. And lo and behold, all 34 charges, all guilty, and I don't know that we will ever be the same. We have proven that our system of justice in this country works.
Yeah, and I think what it shows too with the jury on the notes that they were submitting requests is that they didn't put all their baskets on Michael Cohen's testimony. They were more or less going back to what David Pecker's testimony was throughout the trial. And then you kind of, like the judge's instructions and stuff, I mean, they asked even for that to be brought so then they can go over that once again. And a lot of people would ask, well, why don't they have a copy of the judge's instructions with them? According to New York law, they can't have a hard copy. They have to ask for the instructions again in front of the judge. But as soon as the notes started coming back that they were weighing more towards David Pecker's testimony, I started to feel a little bit more confident that we would not have a hung jury. I still did not believe, even up till the moment that the verdict came back, that we would end up with 34 counts. It just shows like how even with the jury, how they went down through each one of these charges on the 175-10 penal code. And the reason why I bring that up is because a lot of people are on the right keep stating that, you know, what's the penal code? What's the law that was broken? Well, it's 175.10, which is falsifying business records to commit a crime or cover up a crime. And each one of these charges are based on invoices, vouchers, and repayment. So each one at a time, a voucher was made for legal fees, which was basically a lie that he was convicted, the voucher and the repayment.
And let's not forget, because a lot of people out there are saying, well, the statute of limitations ran out on these charges that were misdemeanors, and Alvin Bragg just made them felonies so that there could be a case. Remember, what makes them felonies is that not only did you address the penal code, but because these crimes were committed in order to impact an election, that's what made it a felony. So it's not just a bunch of hubbub that we got to this point where it was 34 counts, all felonies. There actually was a reason why these were the charges that Alvin Bragg brought. The other thing I want to get into is, you talked about the testimony of Michael Cohen, how it maybe wasn't as important. David Pecker's testimony was certainly important. I think Stormy Daniels, some of her testimony was superfluous, but some of it did have an impact on the trial. But you know what had an impact was the evidence. You talked about the evidence, and specifically Exhibits 35 and 36, where we see Alan Weisselberg's handwriting on some of these documents about how they are going to pay Michael Cohen back for the money he laid out to Stormy Daniels that was the hush money. It was his writing on these official documents that really was the smoking gun.
Yeah, I pointed this out, I believe, on the last podcast too, that there was $35,000 per month, 12 installments that Alan agreed that was reimbursement for the Stormy Daniels hush money. And let's also not forget that the jury basically found Donald Trump guilty of interfering with the 2016 election. Like, they came up with the guilty on the basis that he only did this to interfere and deprive the American people of information leading the 2016 election. Let's also we also need to stop this whole notion that the statute of limitations ran out on the felony or anything. According to New York state law, once you move out of state, then the statute of limitations pauses. It does not start back up until there's either a charge or you move back to that state. So if he moved out, well, whoever moves out at whatever time, 2017, it stops at that 2017 mark and pauses. So the statute of limitations on these crimes in Penal Code 175.10 did not run out.
A couple other things I think we need to talk about, and some rumors we need to dispel on this podcast about this whole thing. One, this is not the Biden Justice Department, getting retribution on Trump, right? This is a state case. Alvin Bragg has nothing to do with the federal government. This is not Joe Biden's Justice Department that brought this case. Two, everyone's talking about the jurors. Well, those 12 jurors, they're just a bunch of liberals. They're just a bunch of progressives. That is not true. We saw in their voir dire, in their questions that they had to answer, in the forms they had to fill out, some got their news from True Social. One could think that if you're getting your news from True Social, you're probably not a liberal. Also, some getting their news from Fox News. I'm guessing if you're getting your news from Fox News, you're not a liberal. So the jury was really made up of a variety of different people from different walks of life. We had a couple of lawyers on there that may have helped things. But this wasn't 12, extremely liberal jurors in New York who convicted Donald Trump.
No, and also on the form, and part of the instructions from the judge is, are you able to look at this case and rule on this case in an impartial manner? So it doesn't matter if there's 12 Democrats or 12 Republicans. When they go in, it's 12 U.S. citizens that are asked extensive questions, not only from the prosecutors, but the defense. So the defense has just as much say so into this selection process as what the prosecution does, and so does the judge. And quite frankly, the judge in this case threw out quite a few people because he didn't feel like that they could rule on this case with being impartial. So he threw them out himself. So the notion for anybody to think that this jury was tainted, it just goes right along with all their excuses for Donald Trump, and a reason for them to believe that Donald Trump isn't a convicted felon, or he's not a fraud, which he's been proven throughout the history to be that, and also proven liable of sexual assault.
And also, the whole notion, oh, Donald Trump wasn't allowed to testify, and the Donald Trump's attorneys weren't allowed to call witnesses that they wanted to call, and the whole case was a sham. No, that's not the case at all. They could have called whoever they wanted. Donald Trump, it's always the defendant's right to testify, no matter what. Even if his lawyer says you shouldn't testify, it could have been Donald Trump's right to say, I want to testify. That's always the defendant's right. So all of that is just hogwash. And by the way, if you're thinking to yourself, well, you know what, I really don't see how this was, this was a great case. Well, okay, that could be your opinion. If you want to blame someone on why Donald Trump was convicted and you really just don't believe that it was a fair trial, blame his own defense attorneys. Todd Blanche, really a prosecutor and not a defense attorney, and Donald Trump picked him to defend him. And Todd Blanche doesn't have a big history defending clients in this way. If you want to look at what doomed Donald Trump, aside from, committing the crimes, his legal team didn't do a great job, in my humble opinion.
No, 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 no. And you're right. Donald Trump's lawyers, for one, can't refuse him or compel him to take the stand. So what that basically means is it's on his own judgment whether he wanted to take the stand or not. And to have any type of thought that a gag order restricted that is completely false. The judge basically said after Donald Trump gave a press conference that the gag order was going to stop him from testifying. The judge said, "No, no, 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 it's not. We actually welcome you to come up and testify." And the defense rest. They called um, one person up, and I believe Costello, which was absolutely devastating to their case on their behalf for calling him
Right.
up. Um, and they also tried to call up an FEC expert, but that's not permitted in New York law because you can't call somebody up to give a legal expert in a courtroom, and when that's the judge's job. So that's where that particular witness fell through for the Donald Trump's defense.
All right. The bottom line is Donald Trump was convicted on all 34 charges, all felonies. He will be sentenced on July 11th in the courtroom of Judge Merchan, the person he's still railing against in public. So, not quite the brightest idea. But
The
what we need to,
Democrat judge that donated $35 for a T-shirt
yeah,
years ago.
yeah. Well, listen, I have a feeling that Donald Trump is not going to stop taking shots at Judge Merchan, and it's only going to hurt him when it comes time to sentencing. Also, I happen to be. It's so weird how life works. Literally about an hour or two after the verdict came down, I happened to be up in Boston, in my hometown, with my
Mhm.
mom, and we were going to the Schubert Theater in Boston to go see a live production of the Sisters-in-Law podcast with Joyce Vance and Barb McQuaid, Kimberly Atkins Stores, and Jill Wine Banks, some of the best lawyers on the planet who were recording a live podcast 2 hours after the verdict. So we got some insight into the legal minds right after the verdict. And one of the things that came out is if you're hoping that an appeal would be wrapped up before November, no chance. It takes about a year for an appeal to get through the system. So this thing is going to be a headache through the election and beyond. Speaking of the election, Jonathan, we have to talk about how this guilty verdict could impact November's election. We have to do that on the other side. You're listening to Ford News. Please subscribe wherever you're listening to this right now. Subscribe to the podcast. If you're listening to this, go watch this on YouTube. We've got clips all over the place, thanks to our senior double secret executive producer, Matt. And if you're watching on YouTube, go subscribe to the podcast. That's how we do things. We'll do that on the other side after this. You're watching and listening to Ford News. Welcome back to Ford News. He is Jonathan Ford. Follow him on X at FordJonathan5. I'm Brian London. Follow me at Miami Radio Beast. Follow the show at Ford News Podcast. Please subscribe to the podcast wherever you're listening to this right now. If you're listening, go follow the YouTube page. Go subscribe to that. Hit the thumbs up. Make a comment. That lets other people know that the show is pretty good. And if you're watching on YouTube and you want the audio experience because you drive to work and you can't watch while you're driving, well, then go subscribe to the podcast on Apple or Amazon or Spotify or any of the 27 different places where this show can be found. Jonathan, we talked about Donald Trump being convicted in a New York court, 34 counts, all felonies. And the big question is, how might this impact November's election? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think it will, and I've said this repeatedly that independents are the biggest demographic of voters that are out there right now, and these are the ones that will be persuaded one way or the other to vote for him or not. The Democrats have already made up their mind who they're going to vote for. The Republican MAGA have already made up their mind who they're going to vote for, and this conviction's not going to is not going to change that. But what we're finding from polls that were just released this morning by CBS and a couple others is that one that really stuck out to me that has changed dramatically is 51, nearly 52% of the nation now finds that Donald Trump is unfit to serve as president. So that one just and alone caught my attention, and what also plays into that is 78% of the people that they polled also said they either somewhat or very closely followed the conviction of Donald Trump. So that means that they were tuned in. They were paying attention to what was going on during this trial for the most part, and that's where you're starting to see some of the numbers of. We'll just go over one. Did Donald Trump uh, receive a fair trial? And you're always going to get like Democrats, 96% fair feel that Donald Trump got a fair trial, while only 86% of the Republican Party. But the key part on even this poll is that 54% of the independents felt that Donald Trump received a fair trial, which just shows that some of the voters, especially on the independent voices side, is not gonna vote for Donald. And it also shows in another poll that by Reuters is that basically just says, "Are you less likely to vote for Donald Trump now that he's been convicted of a felon?" And as far as GOP voters or Republican voters, 11% say they are now less likely to vote for Donald Trump, and independents, a staggering 26%, say they are likely now to most likely not vote for Donald Trump. To me, is going to show in the next coming polls devastating news for Donald Trump.
But let me push back for a second by saying
Mhm.
that's
Sure.
all that's all fine and good. And if we had elections that were decided by the popular vote, I would believe that meant something. But really, this election's coming down to 6 states in the Electoral College. So I'm not really sure how much those numbers will play in to the actual election because really all we're talking about is states like Pennsylvania and Wisconsin and Nevada and others that this election's coming down to. So not only do we have to see if this impacts the independent voters, but the independent voters in those specific states that really are going to make the impact on this election.
People that identify as Democratic and people that identify as Republican over the years has diminished significantly. It's roughly around 17 to 22% that actually identify between one party or the other. Most people now, even in most states, even in the states that you're referenced to, Brian, in the battleground states, identify as independent voters. And I would just uh, tell people like this is a good sample of what is going on uh small size, but what we do, you are correct, we need to get data from other states that kind of expand on what these recent polls are showing. But we also have to even look back even further to this, Brian, that I've talked about repeatedly, is that the Democrats have, and President Biden has outperformed every single poll in these special elections or even in primary elections up to this point. So I see nothing statistically that wouldn't suggest that keep going.
All right, here's another thing I'm going to hit you with on devil's advocate, right? Is according to the Trump campaign, which I don't know whether I believe them or not, they have raised $200 million since the verdict came down. That's an awful lot of money. But my question is, even if you have that much money, how many minds are you changing with that money? That's my question. Is I think Donald Trump could spend $1 billion on advertising, and it's not really going to change anyone's mind. But maybe I'm naive in that manner.
So the figure now is basically what, $70 million. It was 52.8 million within uh 24 hours that he had raised. But what I would like to just get the wait for the FEC to report this, or for them to report to the FEC, so I can see if it's super PACs, or where the money is coming from. But there's nothing that's ever said that Trump hasn't been able to raise money in the past or raise for his campaign.
So Eric Trump on television this morning said, and I quote, "In terms of small dollars, we're well over 70 million. If you add the large dollar donations to it, you're over 200 million." All I know is this. All I know is this, that I can't believe what comes out of Eric Trump's or any other Trump's mouth, but I do know they've probably raised a lot of money because, cult people will do what cult people do.
So I'll look into the 200 million to see where that reference comes. But I'm somebody that searches things, and I search sources right away. And I actually just did one right here, right as we're talking, from CBS News, that says that they'd raised reported $52.8 million in the last 24 hours, and roughly 70 million since the conviction. But I just like to see where his sources is coming from. I do feel like that could be a more realistic number if it's for the year. Um, so we'll wait and find out. But
We'll
it's
tackle
one
that.
thing
Yeah.
is rally sizes and donations don't equal election wins, and also apparently won't take away 34 convictions.
Well, after all this, we have realized that with the Trump family, size does matter. So we will have to keep that in mind. Jonathan, one thing that I can't believe this is even out there, it's a wackadoo story. People actually think that the governor of New York, Kathy Hochul, is going to pardon Donald Trump. Is that something that's really out there?
Yeah, there's been multiple calls, mainly from the Republican side, but also Representative Dean Phillips, who everybody knows was a candidate against President Biden, has also called for Governor Kathy Hochul to basically um, offer or issue a pardon to Donald Trump. And what they're calling is to heal the nation, to uh, restore trust in the Justice Department. Also, some of the Republican Party is asking President Biden to reach out to Governor Hochul and ask her to issue a pardon, which I I don't think there is, pardon my French, a chance in hell for that to happen. For one, it's 34 convictions, all felonies. But here's another thing: like, where would governor, the governor or the president, how are they going to go to their base, their voting base, and justify this action uh, going into an election year? Now, if President Biden was already reelected and he's only got 2 years left, could I see a possibility of maybe some reaching over the aisle? Yes, but it's not going to happen in an election year.
Yeah, I don't think so. By the way, President Biden cannot pardon Donald Trump because it's not a federal crime. It was a state crime. You
Correct.
cannot pardon someone that's been convicted of a state crime from the Oval Office. So that maybe we'll see what happens with the other trials out there that are in federal jurisdictions, but this one is not a part of that. All right, we're going to take another break. On the other side, it is our favorite segment that we do every week. It is the Ford Fact Check. We'll do that on the other side. You're listening and watching the Ford News Podcast. Welcome back to Ford News. He is Jonathan Ford. Follow him on X at FordJonathan5. I'm Brian London. Follow me at Miami Radio Beast and follow the show at Ford News Podcast. Folks, it is time for our favorite segment of the week. It's time for the Ford Fact Check. All right, Jonathan, what kind of facts do you have for us this week?
So the one fact that I wanted to bring up is the amount of countries that Donald Trump, now being a convicted felon, that is no longer permitted to visit. So I know it's kind of comical in a way,
Yeah.
but it's also kind of serious because we have a Republican nominee that if these countries went by their own laws, even for a president of the United States wouldn't be able to visit them. So I have the full list of uh, basically the countries that, as of right now, Donald Trump isn't permitted to visit as a convicted felon. And I'll just kind of go down the list just so people can kind
Sure.
of get a kind of chuckle out of it. Argentina, Australia, Brazil, Cambodia, Canada, China, Cuba, Dominican Republic, Egypt, Ethiopia, Hong Kong, India, Indonesia, Iran, Ireland, Israel, Japan, Kenya, Mexico, Morocco, Nepal, New Zealand, Peru, Philippines, Singapore, South Africa, South Korea, Taiwan,
Tanzania. Yeah.
Turkey, Ukraine, United Arab, and the United Kingdom. So there's a whole list here of countries, 37 of them, that as of right now, as a convicted felon, he's not able to even travel to.
Wow, 37 countries that he can't go to. Some of them are our biggest allies, right? You think about some of the countries in Europe and Israel, the United Arab Emirates. I mean, these are some of the most important countries that we deal with on a second by second basis that he wouldn't be allowed to go to. Although, one would think that if the worst case scenario happens and Donald Trump does somehow get back into the White House, that some sort of exception would be made, but maybe it wouldn't. And again, this just adds to the fodder that we're going to have to deal with as we head towards November and beyond. Amazing. 37 countries that Donald Trump can no longer visit. Man, if it was only 34 countries, it would be so satisfying. 34 countries, 34 charges. It would be so satisfying. But it's fine. It's 37.
Yeah, our
We've
editor actually brought that up. That
yeah,
when I said that there was countries, he said, "Please tell me there's 34 of them," and I said, "No, there's actually 37."
right.
So it was kind of a joke that we're having off script here. So
All right, well, we still got a lot to get to here on Ford News in the coming weeks. We should have some sort of Supreme Court decision on on a couple of cases. We should have some more rulings in the a case down here that Eileen Cannon is overseeing. I mean, granted, slowly, but at some point. And we'll
we have
have
the
the
Hunter
rest.
Biden trial.
We have a Hunter Biden trial coming up. Which wait a minute. So the Biden Justice Department is screwing Trump, and that conviction is their fault. But wait a minute, it's the Biden Justice Department that's putting Biden's son on trial. Make that make sense.
And I'll also cover the and pay attention to Hunter Biden, uh, basically trial that starts tomorrow, just as intense as I did for Donald Trump, because we have to understand that uh, if you break the law, you suffer consequences. So
Sure.
if a jury finds Hunter Biden guilty, he must face the consequences. And that's what I've been preaching all the way. And Brian, I know you're the same thing, but I just want people to understand that it may say Ford News on the top, and I may be extremely have extreme liberal views, but it doesn't mean that I know that I don't know the difference between right and wrong. And if Hunter Biden is wrong, then he must pay the consequences. And even President Biden has even said the same thing, that his son went through a troubling past and he must face the consequences of that. But his love is unconditional for his son.
By the way, this is the gun charges trial. So this is about
Correct.
him buying and owning a gun, and also, you know, when you go to buy a gun, it asks you if you are addicted to drugs, if you're a drug addict, and if you he said no, and obviously that wasn't the case. And his girlfriend at the time, you know, just maybe a couple weeks after he got the gun, threw it into the dumpster because she was afraid he was going to do something bad with it. So this is the gun charges trial that we're talking about that we'll be covering with Hunter Biden, and we are going to cover it because it is about truth and justice, and both Jonathan and I believe in that. So we've got a lot to get to in the weeks to come, and we will do that. We want to thank our new double secret assistant, senior executive producer, editor Matt for helping us out with this one. Jonathan, always a pleasure, my friend. Hey, everyone out there, wherever you're listening to this, please subscribe to the podcast. If you're watching this, go subscribe to the podcast. If you're listening to this, go follow the YouTube channel. Go hit a thumbs up. Go make a nice comment. We appreciate everyone who watches and listens to Ford News. For Jonathan, I'm Brian London. We'll see you next time here on Ford News.